Hey everyone, I just found out that Microsoft's headset adapter likely won't be here till sometime in March, so I decided to make a video of a more permanent and robust modification. This one definitely requires that you be at least decent at soldering, and I do not recommend trying this modification if you've never soldered before. If you're just looking for a basic modification, then check out my original Xbox One headset adapter tutorial here. I also want to make it clear that while I did this modification without a tutorial, I am by no means the first person to make this modification. I've just been getting a lot of requests for this video. To do this modification, you'll need a soldering iron, a Torx T5 screwdriver, a small flathead screwdriver or something similar to pry with, wire strippers, and some electrical tape or shrink tubing. You may also want some hot glue, but that won't be required. Let's get started. The first thing you need to do is pry the back cover off the Xbox One chat connector. This popped off pretty easy for me by pushing the flathead screwdriver into the wedge here and prying with my hands. As you feel the clip start to loosen, slide the flathead screwdriver down and wedge it into the other side of the connector. Once you've successfully lifted up one side, the other should pop off easily like this. Set the cover to the side and grab your Torx T5 screwdriver. You might be able to use a Torx T4 screwdriver if you're lucky. The Torx T4 screwdriver worked for 4 out of the 5 screws for me the first time I took this apart, but almost stripped the 5th screw, so definitely use the Torx T5 if you have it. Here are the 5 screws you need to remove. Once you get the screws off, the plastic shell will come apart into 2 pieces like this. Take a look at the circuit board. You'll see 4 wires soldered to the board. Those are the mic, speaker, and ground wires. You will be unsoldering these wires and soldering the new wires from your gaming headset chat cable directly to these locations. Also notice that these 2 guide pins come off, so if yours popped off earlier, you can stop panicking now. Here's a shot of the chat connector completely disassembled, and another shot showing the other side of the circuit board. Now grab your soldering iron and desolder all 4 wires. Don't worry about which ones went where because the board has labels on it to tell you what each signal is. You can see here that it says GND for ground and mic for your mic, obviously. The other 2 are a bit confusing. Just know that you want to solder your speaker wire to the pad labeled HPL. You do not want to solder anything to the HPR pad. If you want to know why you shouldn't solder anything to that pad, check out the beginning of my ultimate troubleshooting guide here. And if you're a nerd like me and want to know what HPR and HPL stand for, HPL stands for Headphone Live, and HPR stands for Headphone Return. Now that you've removed the Xbox One connections, remove the Xbox One cable from the chat connector housing. Once that's out of the way, grab the chat cable from your gaming headset. You can also use any 2.5mm cable from your local electronics store if you want to save your original chat cable to use with your Xbox 360. Now cut the end that would typically connect into your Xbox 360 controller and expose the wires like this. Before you cut the cable, make sure to keep it long enough so that you can comfortably have the controller in your hands without having to hunch over. Now strip back each of the wires. Make sure you only strip back a very small amount of wire so you don't have a long section of exposed wire that can make a connection with one of the small components on the circuit board. Here's a snapshot to give you an idea of how short to cut your wires. Now it's time to solder. Start with your ground wire because you'll need to either put shrink tubing on it like I have, or wrap it with electrical tape after you solder the connection. If you don't know, the ground wire is your bare wire in your cable. Sometimes it's a silver color like mine, but other times it's a copper color. You might even have multiple bare wires in your cable, one that goes straight through and another that wraps around one of your other wires like this. Just wrap all the bare wires together and solder them to the pad labeled GND. Once that is soldered, move on to the next pad, which is for your mic wire. I have a running list in the description with the wire color codes for a bunch of headsets. If your headset isn't listed in the description, you can still make this modification, I just don't know which wire is going to be your mic or speaker wire. From an electronic standpoint, if you mix up your mic and speaker wires, you won't harm your headset or chat connector in any way, so trial and error for those wires is okay. Just remember not to connect anything to the pad labeled HPR. If you do modify a headset that isn't in the list, please comment below with what the color code is for your headset so I can add that to the list. Credit to you, of course. Anyway, once you've determined which wire is your mic wire, solder that to the board. Next, determine which wire is your speaker wire, and solder that to the pad labeled HPL. Once you've made those connections, look very closely to make sure you don't have any bare wires touching anything other than the pad that they were soldered to. If you notice some bare wires like I have here, just wrap some electrical tape around them. Now just reassemble the jack connector and you'll be done. I recommend wrapping the cable in a loop like this to give the solder connections a little bit of strain relief. Before pressing on the back part of the connector, make sure the cable is lined up with the cable cutout. You do not want to be crushing the cable in the connector. Next, reinsert the 2 guide pins. They fit perfectly into the cutouts, so it should be obvious when they are in correctly. You can also push these in before pressing the circuit board into place, but I personally found it easier this way. Once the pins are in, grab the front part of the jack connector and press that into place. It should look like this before you start putting screws back in. Now put the screws back in. It doesn't matter which ones you put in first, but I prefer putting the silver screws in first since they hold the center of the connector together. At this point, you can now test your connection to see if you soldered it correctly. If everything works, and you want your wires to be a bit more secure, you can put hot glue into the connector here to hold the cable in place. But a word of caution, the glue will hold the 2 halves of the connector together. So if you do decide to put hot glue in there, it will be harder to take apart the connector later if for some reason you ever wanted to. Once everything is satisfactory, just press on the back cover and get back to gaming. A variation of this modification would be to solder a short 2.5mm cable to the circuit board instead. This way you can plug any 2.5mm headset cable into the adapter. If you can find a small enough jack, you can even glue it inside the connector so it would be a seamless design. Again, I'm not the first person to think of this, but I thought it should be mentioned. I hope you all found that helpful. If you did, please like and share this video on Facebook, Twitter, forums, MySpace if you still have it, and anywhere else you can think of so we can spread the word on a more long-term and professional looking modification. The only reason my videos get seen by more than a few hundred people is because of you guys sharing it, so a big thanks goes out to all of you who've been sharing my other videos. As always, if you guys have any questions or need help, post a comment below and I'll do my best to walk you through whatever you need help with. Also, keep telling me what you want to see in future videos. I made this video only because a bunch of you either requested it or were asking about how to do it. I'm Eric from Tactical Missions, and I'll see you guys in my next video.